Hello and welcome to the Refugee Welcome Collective Lunch and Learn series. In these sessions, we aim to bring interesting and timely information to you, supporters of refugees. Whether you are a volunteer, community sponsor, resettlement agency staff, a local advocate, or just someone who is interested in learning more, we hope that you enjoy today's session, Call Me American, with storyteller and author Abdi Iftin. Refugee Welcome Collective collaborates with partners to provide in-depth training programs, weekly learning sessions, resources, and on-demand technical assistance for sponsors, practitioners at resettlement agencies, refugees paired with sponsors, community and institutional partners, and others to support quality community sponsorship programs across the United States. Next slide. As a reminder for everyone joining us today, there is a control panel in the upper right-hand corner of your screen that will allow you to submit questions through the questions box. There will be ample time for questions at the end of the webinar. Everyone on today's webinar is automatically muted. However, if you have any tech issues, just raise your hand through the control panel or submit a question in the questions box so we can assist you. Additionally, a recording of today's presentation will be sent today following the webinar. This brings us to our presenter today. Our presenter today is Abdi Iftin. Call Me American is the title of Abdi's award-winning memoir. The memoir follows Abdi's life from his childhood in Mogadishu, Somalia, to living as a refugee in Nairobi, Kenya, to coming to the US through a visa lottery. Abdi currently lives in Maine. Abdi's work has been featured on CNN, NPR, BBC, and the BBC. In addition to his work as storyteller and author, Abdi is also a communications specialist at Church World Service. We are very thankful to have Abdi with us today to share some stories from his life and work, as well as advice for volunteers, community sponsors, and welcomers. Abdi, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Absolutely. Great, wonderful. Thank you for the intro, and I'm really delighted to be here today. Well, I would love to begin with the question, since you have heard that I published a memoir. Why write? You know, why do you have to write? Here are a few things that I have experienced as even before I moved to the U.S. 8 years ago. You know, this feeling of your voice being your voice, but other people writing your own story. So I decided to really talk a little bit about, why write your story. And then I came up with what's following here that you might be able to see on the screen. This is how, the way I would like to compress into the reasons why I actually write. To me, it's a mission to bring the unheard voices to radio, to print, and to audiences worldwide. Well, before I dive into the obstacles, so let me just briefly talk about why I think it's a mission to bring the unheard voices. We're talking about impacted voices today, right? These impacted voices are also the unheard voices in so many ways. For so many years, there was this feeling that lots of things are happening in your life. As at age 5, we lost everything we owned. My dad loses his job, the war tears everything apart, but it does not seem like those individual stories are written or heard or listened, and this has become quite a problem, whether you are in your own country, even if you leave your country and cross borders and travel the world. There's this package narrative that always goes around, which is refugees are put in this box and their stories are told just one way, and there's this format that goes on. So I decided, you know what? Yeah, we need to get the unheard voices out, but also those individual human stories are very critical. Well, it's not easy said than done. As you know, there's a list of things that I could name that can become the obstacles for people like myself or people who are currently, as we speak, crossing borders or leaving their houses because of all the other factors that could happen to get people out of their places, neighborhoods, places where they felt safe. And those include the risks. Can you really talk about what you heard, what you experienced, all those pain and trauma? Of course, that didn't come by itself. People have done that. It could be a group, it could be a government, it could be you know uh, uh, a leader who's intended in silencing those voices. So those are one of the risks. And the reason I selected risk as the bullet number one is I hope so many of you, on top of reading the book, you also check out a podcast on This American Life if you love listening to podcasts, which talks about those issues. It's a 1 hour documentary about my story moving to the United States after winning the lottery. In other words, there's a challenge everywhere. The risk is not only necessarily in your own country, the risk also exists within the common narrative. I'll give you one example. I know some of you might be thinking, oh, when he says risk, he might be talking about like armed groups in his country or maybe the government that's, really bad and doesn't like its own people. But bureaucracy, the interview, process and everything else itself can be considered as a risk. The reason I say this is I remember standing face to face with a U.S. State Department officer, who was at the time doing the interview to see if I qualify to move and live in the United States. And those interviews were really tricky. Sometimes I didn't even know how to answer some of the questions, right? Have you ever, carried a weapon? Or if you ever joined Al-Shabaab? I mean, Somalia is all about the war, and don't tell me that you've not, those kind of things. Like, what do you do? How do I come over this challenge? How do I climb up this risk mountain and then get on the other side and scream to the world to say this is a problem? And I realized the best way I could do that is just to use a counter narrative, write down the existing true stories, stories that do exist within these people. Do not generalize, people as the way you see it on the media, for example. Um, so layer after layer after layer, and I know that a lot of you might have worked with recent refugees from Afghanistan that the nonprofits I work with, Church World Service, and probably Refugee Welcome. We might have all experienced these difficult stories and people who went through a few things, and a lot of people don't feel comfortable talking about it, and some do feel comfortable, talking about it. To me, it was just taking a risk, talking about even one sentence of your own story, right? It could get you into trouble. So if you think that writing a book is actually, not that much problem for a refugee. I would say it really is. It involves a lot of thinking, a lot of conversation with members of your family. I remember talking to my mother and saying, so I can't remember much of my childhood. Mom, just walk me through. And she's not here. She's in Somalia. And she's one of the people who asked me why now, right? Why at this time? And she was right, absolutely. But how do you respond to that? If I get a book out, if I tell a story and a member of my family is hurt, of course I'm responsible because I got that out. So it involved a lot of thinking, a lot of tears, and just having a conversation with my family, and eventually coming down to making a decision together that actually involves risk. Um, okay, so I hope that makes sense. The second bullet here is the difficult choices contra the common narratives. So those difficult choices, I'm going to give you one quick example. When my book came out, I sat down with three filmmakers who are all interested turning the memoir into a film, right? And this is a new world to me, but I had to do a lot of thinking, see how things go, and I came down to saying, okay, so how do we go with this? And I have this experience from previous movies that were made based on Somalia, which if you are not from that country, you might assume that what's in there actually is representative or representation of those people and the country. But if you are actually a Somali, those are strange things, right? I mean, I don't remember um, some scenes or events that I have seen, for example, Captain Phil by Tom Hanks, right? The Somali pirates looking like they were the bosses, they were the villain, like, oh, I mean, I don't remember. I just remember those guys hanging out, chewing khat, and playing soccer with us. So you don't see those different perspectives of things. It's just all about taking this image and put them up this way so that the world sees that these people don't even smile. They don't even have this open face, kind of. So it was difficult counting the choices. In other words, if I put humor, and which is what I did, talking about my story, talk about childhood, how we watched movies, and how we presented, ourselves like we were in the characters of those movies. All the fun things that we have done, the freedom and the liberty that you can get as an individual, even living within a country that's called, quote unquote, uh, the most dangerous place on the planet, for example. I mean, there's so many adjectives that can come up if you look up the paper. What Somalia's, the titles that they have used towards this country, and so those were the difficult choices. Just counter those narratives with everything else, and then showing the human side of the story. Is the world listening? Let's talk about the human side of the story. What's the human side of the story? The human side of the story is that we love soccer, right? It's just not all about we love AK-47. We actually love soccer. There are people in the country like myself who don't like being around weapons or just to stay away from the danger. But there's plenty of space for you to play hide and seek. All the fun things that do exist. Human-sided stories um, don't often are not often represented in other places. So to me, this was just an encouragement to write my book. If I talk about the human side of the story, who's going to hate that, right? I did not want to come up with a story or blame a group or something like that, which is quite a political book, but mine was not. And that was quite some of the obstacles that you had to come over. Let's see. We can go to the next slide. All right. Some of the questions that you might be asking is, can you name a few things about why you actually write? And we're still talking about writing. We're not even talking about talking and speaking, which you could do. So when I got this invitation, for example, we want your voice. We want people to hear from you, right? But introduce yourself. And sometimes there's so many ways that you can introduce yourself. Thank you for the intro. For example, that Abdi is an author and blah, blah, award winning. But I do write not to get an award, not to be recognized as one of those fancy authors. To me, it was actually, you know what? English is not native to me. That itself is a challenge. Of course, so many people know that. It's just like you going to another country or maybe watching a lot of Spanish movies and learning Spanish that way. And then now you have to write your story in that language that may not even be your second language. It may not even be your third language. And English, to be honest, is, I could say, fourth language to me. There are other languages that come in with me. Somali is my native language. Arabic is the second language that we speak in Somalia. And then there's Swahili, which is next door. So we hear that a lot. There's a lot of words within the Somali, but English is just such a distant language, but I still was able to do that. Now, what I write to preserve and disseminate the memories and the narratives of my family. I did not want my family to get lost in the middle of this narrative about trouble, warlord, things like that. So I represented my mother the best way I could in the book, which is beautiful young woman who herded her hundreds and hundreds of goats out in the wilderness of Somalia, and she meets this tall guy, that's my dad, and they just do these romantic meetings, and that you don't often hear from communities like mine, and I wanted to let the world know that. So anybody who read the book gets back to me and says, "I love your mom," which is exactly what I love to hear. And I'm sure she doesn't hear that from readers, but she hears that through me because I hear from readers and then I get back to her. Now, the second point is I write to remind myself of the struggles and overcoming challenge and the joy. So what do I mean by that? See, when you write that you lost a sister, which sometimes, the book has some painful stuff in it, and you really have to write about that. Otherwise, this whole history is going to get lost, especially if you come from a nation of poetry and oral society, which just says these amazing things, but it's not really written a lot. And especially if you come from a place where there's no library and bookstores or schools. So I said, I want to write myself, to remind myself, sorry, of the struggles and overcoming challenges and the joy, which is great when you write and you're a human being sitting right here and you look back and you realize, gosh, I could have died 10 times in one day, right? But you have not. You're here now, and the world's ready to hear those stories. And then to honor my family's history, there's a deep, sweet, amazing history that does not need to get lost. So now let's write that. Let's translate this story for the next generation to know. All right. I write to give a gift to the world and to the next generation. So the gift I want to give to the world is, hey, we're good. Yes, every country goes through a war. Europe, it happened there, right there, and now every American that I know loves to visit Italy or England. Nations go through wars, but there's always the good side of it. When it ends, I want the world to have a sense of great feeling of this beautiful country. So that's the gift I wanted to give to the world. It's a beautiful. There are descriptions I have for the beautiful blue Indian Ocean in Somalia, the sand, the weather, the skies, the stars, the moon, the sunshine, and all of that. So, in other words, I would love to go back myself. I write to look back and see myself from distance, and that I think is something that every author who really writes about their biography or memoir loves to do. You see yourself sitting here, but you also see yourself in other ways, right? When you were 10, when you're 15, and the final point here is I like to celebrate the victories and meaning and life. Um, I think that makes sense. We can go to the next slide, uh, Derek, if that's okay with you. Well, here's quote unquote that I actually took from authors that I admire a lot, writers who I worked with, and they all live in Connecticut. Uh, this is a paragraph that I really like that sort of like sheds light on um, the narratives of refugees. I feel a strong responsibility, they said, to assure all narratives are pulled, including those from individuals who arrive to Western traditions from dynamic refugee backgrounds. I hope this makes sense. I think about it a lot, mostly because um, I think everyone here either has volunteered with a refugee family or knows a little bit about it. The common thing is when we get to the US, we're often the ones who are doing every effort to get to know this country, the language, the culture, the traditions. We're the ones who are learning how to bake pies. We're the ones who have to figure out what flavor of ice cream we really, really like. And these are some of the things that I have experienced. And I remember, trying to order coffee at Dunkin' Donuts day 2 of my arrival in the US. And I'm just saying tea. And that doesn't make any sense to Americans anymore. It's like, what kind of tea? There's all kind of choices. Do you like green tea? Do you like black tea? Do you like this tea? Do you like stuff in your tea? Those are not the questions I've ever been asked before I moved to the United States, right? And now we're learning a lot. But I also wanted Americans to open themselves up and start learning from the other way, because not only are we coming here empty-handed, it's a whole lot of experience. There's a whole lot of um, uh, 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 memories and great things that you might feel admired if we talk about it. I'm sure that um, every refugee that I've actually talked to, and I used to be one, I learned a lot of things from them, whether they're from Rwanda or Afghanistan or Tajikistan, doesn't matter, right? But there's always amazing things that you learn. And um, I think people should understand that there's the Western traditions, but there's also other traditions, which is, I think, what would make us a great nation when we really come out and get to know that. All right, we can go to the next slide. All right, now, what do I mean by this? Obviously, refugee narratives, and when I say narrative, I'm talking about refugee stories. Refugee narratives are most often cultivated um, within the Western society as objects for pity, aid, suspicion, um, and also they become locations for admiration, awe, and inspiration for readers and listeners. So I sort of like touched a little bit of this at the beginning. Um, if you ask the average American what comes to your mind when you see refugees, or when you hear the word refugee, you probably get a lot of answers, right? Some might say, "Oh, what comes to my mind is just a bunch of people crowded in tents, for example, um, or moms carrying their babies in the back and just moving along this dusty road." There's all these images that come to mind, and then um, I have often seen people share pictures or photos of refugees, which is about refugee camp, some aid distribution center, and things like that. But the average refugee is actually not like that. They're full humans, professors, some doctors. I mean, you could easily become a refugee in within hours if you something happens in your neighborhood and you cross the border and want to have safety and maybe seek asylum in another country, right? But we don't see the other side, so we're all putting them together. But also there's another bullet there which says at the same time, we become locations for admiration, awe, and inspiration for readers and listeners. um, this is something I've really been talking about lately. For example, um, well, let me finish reading that sentence, which I hope makes a lot of sense to so many of you. In schools, for example, in this country, the United States, universities, libraries, such stories written by refugees or about refugees shock, shake, disturb, educate readers about global inequities and injustices. They also complicate a reader's understanding of privilege, right? Like, and what it means to be a human being. For these reasons, I personally would like to encourage a critical reading of refugee stories. And the reason I say that is just, yeah, it's like it could become an inspiration for you, but most importantly, you know, the hope is that we get to know who they are. We get to know who, what they went through, the injustice and iniquities that they have experienced even before they landed on the shores of the United States. And then here in this country, I mean, obviously, as you know, we had uh, uh, different administrations in this country that uh, built a system that really does not advantage the some of these minorities, some of these communities that are coming here. So those inequities and injustices really continue for them. It's layer after layer after layer. Um, and some of us come with other backgrounds. I mean, we're not only talking about the word refugee or migration, we're talking about what does the average American think of a Muslim, right? So many of the countries destroyed that are seeking refuge, and some of them coming to the US, including myself. We are Muslims. And then imagine what this country was going through after 9/11. Like, how do you really see that? And I remember times where it felt a little embarrassing to bring yourself forward, like talk about your faith, in public and things like that. And I don't think no human would have to go through that when you don't have anything to do with what one group says, one group does, that you become the sitting duck um, for what happens. That's not, let's be very clear, that does not only happen in Western countries. I'll give you one quick story here. I lived in Kenya in the year 2013, and September that year, a small group, five guys stormed into a mall, people shopping and whatnot, and they took hostage these people, blew things up, right? And these five guys came from the same country, Somalia. But what the government did was to take revenge on the refugees. And who were the refugees? I was one of them, and my brother was one of them. And life after that, uh, the attack on that mall was just miserable, really. I mean, sometimes I can't even absorb like how why does a human being does that? So it just shows you this one element. It's just sort of like reminded me of what happened in 9/11. Things that a group does, and then a whole bunch of others become victims without them even knowing nothing about what's happening. And that's a major problem that we often experience, usually happening within our society today. So in other words, one of the reasons why I am sharing these slides with those of us who are here with us today is to give you uh, a sense of direction, a sense of what do I need to do. There are, and obviously every writer who more like me comes from a different background, we get questions every single day, whether we visit schools or the library or anywhere else. Like some of those questions that we receive are, what can I do, right? And it was also in the intro, the guidance, the how do we what is there anything right that we could do? Is there anything wrong that we're doing? And things like that. While that seems to be a little tricky based on like for example, I'm like I said, an individual myself, and I don't really like when people bring their dogs in the basement when I visit. And I think the generalization is a Muslim, a Somali is visiting. And if I understand correctly, those people don't like dogs, right? That's the assumption,
Mhm.
right? And so here I am. I see dog hair all over the place, like dog toys on in the living room. But I'm just wondering, where is it? Where did it go? And then there's barking coming from the basement. Like I had experienced these kind of things. And so, and then, and then I usually say, yeah, maybe the first year or so, I was not sure how I would see it. But then I really started taking dogs for a walk and, things change. And so those kind of conversations really critical, right? And there are times as well where the same Americans, maybe different family, you go to their house and I eat out of this plate and the plate goes to the dog right next to me, just licking all over it, right? It's just, you know, so it's interesting. There's no one way actually, but I think communication is critical. Having this conversation with people, meet them, sit down with them, see what makes them comfortable, what makes them uncomfortable, what areas they need support with. And I think even though I spoke English coming to the United States, there are a million ways I needed support, million ways I needed guidance. Number one, this is home. We're calling America home, right? The moment we land here, we're not looking back. We're not saying I just want to be here temporarily. So this is why we're here 5 years and going through the process and becoming citizens and earning the right to vote in this country and participate in the democracy of the United States. So with that, we really want to know. But not only that, we also want others to know from us. So that conversation is very critical. It's just not necessarily that we're here vulnerable and that we want people to hold our hands all the way. Just not like that. And trust me, I think almost every refugee family that you might have dealt with, or maybe an individual, and I don't mean to brag, we learn pretty fast, and that's what people that I know in my state, Maine, usually say. I'm a fast learner, right? You show me one thing, I stick with it. You show me how to have a hot chocolate, I'm gonna go back again for it, right? So it's just imprinted in my mind. In other words, we really like to do our things one thing at a time, which I think is a really good way. So um, the now I'm going to wrap this up because I've been talking for about 30 minutes now. So for you, please look at those narratives. I'm doing everything on my end to have more books and more stories out. But for you to get to know people and listen to their stories, it's also like reading a book. You're diving into them. You're learning, challenge that they are facing, things that makes them excited, happy, things that are good, therapy, you know, taking a walk in the woods, and there's so many things that people can learn from each other. And so, an event, at the end of the day, we're all Americans, I think. For those who agree with me, whether you have a green card or citizenship, or whether you were born in this country, or whether you were born outside of this country, that America is the idea that brings us all together, and we're in this umbrella together. And what makes us strong, amazing, is the language we speak, different cultures we bring, different food that we serve. I have a choice to not go to the Thai restaurant, but I have a choice to go to the Cambodian restaurant. And those are the choices that you might not find anywhere else on the planet. Really. So it's I think it's I think it's that is the that is what makes this country going. That's what builds this country for the next more and more years. And our kids, the kids that will be born in this country, um, are the Americans that deserve to be equally treated just as Americans. And we're all working towards that. All right. So should we open up to questions?
Yes, let's. And thank you, Abdi. We will. We'll open up to questions. Let's see if you all we'll open up to questions submitted today. And as a reminder, you can still submit questions through the questions pane in your attendee control panel. So you can go ahead and submit any questions for Abdi now. Let's see. Um, let's see. So a few questions for you, Abdi. You mentioned, let's see, kind of like the importance of being able to like teach and share, like of your own experience or culture. Do you have any memories from times that that people, that were welcoming you, kind of ask you to share? Like you were saying, you're learning a lot about how to do all these things in America. Were there any times that people asked you to teach them or share, some of your experience or knowledge?
Fantastic. I really like that question. Yes, and I think it's an everyday thing, right? The more I learn about America, the more people want to learn from me, because I'm putting myself out there. So to give the everybody watching a sense of history here, I moved to the U.S. with a family, a white family that sponsored me into their house, and from day one, it's actually been more like being in school for them as well as for me. We've been learning from each other, and you cannot imagine how delighted I am to hear Somali words flying all around the kitchen at the dinner, at the dinner table. When these people have never been to Somalia, it's just because I did not sit in a class and teach them, but they heard me talking to my mother. So it's like 8 years of hearing this word, and now it just seems like everybody can say, "Hey, Abdi, it's dinner time" in Somali, which is really fantastic. And I think that makes me really, really delighted. And I would also credit them for so many things that I have learned um, with the family. They walked me through the process of Thanksgiving, walked me through without, with my consent, uh, how to wrap Christmas gifts, right? It's just not necessarily that because you're a Muslim, you don't have to participate in this. I admit the first year I was not sure. I was very confused. I didn't know how my community would react. I didn't even know if this was a religion thing. But once I got to know how cool it is to wake up in the morning in your pajamas and like sharing gifts and having a conversation with your family, and knowing that it's a day for people to come together and watch a movie, play games, I said I love it, right? And then when Ramadan comes, Ramadan is I celebrate it. We're fasting 30 days and whatnot. And then at the end, it's Eid, one of the biggest holidays in Islam. And I did uh, say, for example, in 2020, you know, I did that with my family who are not Muslim, who never really participated in anything like that, and they appreciated it. They walked with me from sunrise to sunset, not eating, not drinking, and then we broke the fast together, right? And that to me is just, this is great. I mean, I don't know anything much better than people really accepting you and you accepting them, and that way we're benefiting from each other. It's not them saying, that's hard, I don't want to do it, and so sometimes it involves getting out of your comfort zone for me and for them as well.
Yeah.
And then we have this. Yeah, go ahead.
No, it's okay. I just had another question. Is that okay if we jump into the next, or?
Sure.
Okay. Let's see. A few easy questions. One person wants to know, your English is excellent. How did you learn English?
Well, thanks to the movies. Actually, all of them action films. So, okay, you know the word movie buff, right?
Mm-hmm.
I actually used to be extremely movie buff. My mother hated it. She would find me sitting on the dirt floor and drag me outside and would say, if you go to the movies again, don't come to my house, kind of. But I was rebellious. I really enjoyed movies. Movies distracted me from what was happening in the environment, the wars, the conflicts, and and everything else. And who knows what other bad things I should be doing if I did not really get into, memorizing all these English words. And by the way, when I say action movies, we're talking about a guy who himself, many of you might know, his name is Arnold Schwarzenegger, and this guy is an immigrant himself, inspired by the Tarzan films by Johnny Weissmuller. For those of you who know, that's America to me. America is this ladder where people inspire others and others and others, and I'm so glad to see that. Not am I only here in the United States, but I'm inspiring a lot more people um, who might be coming to this country in the future, and that is, I think, the America that we're building, but that not many people see. But thank you. I think that my pronunciation is better than Arnold. He still has a thick Austrian accent, I hear.
Mm-hmm.
And watching him now, the Terminator and the Commandos, and the times I watched when I couldn't understand a word of it, and now it's quite a different. The visual is the same, the guy is the same, but now I have a sense of saying, oh, he has a thick accent, but I did not know back then, right? And that's one of the amazing things about the human brain. You can definitely, if you go for it, you will learn.
Yeah. Let's see. Some other questions you had mentioned. This one's a little bit tricky. If you have any thoughts, and I can maybe try to think of some thoughts also. You had mentioned at the beginning, to keep in mind that some people might experience or have some risk, when deciding whether to share their story. Do you have any suggestions for trying to prevent that if you're speaking to someone? Like how to ask them questions, realizing that there might be some risk involved?
Well, I hate to be a spokesperson for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know that my own brother is one of the people that does not like to speak publicly. He and so people are different. I am sure that as I think about it, for organizations or volunteer people who are involved in one way or another, one of the most amazing things is just give people a platform to speak, right? Um, you can do so either by showing a sense of safety, which we often find in this country. um, a lot of the friends that I have will not want to speak to the radio or to the journal, but they are talking everything at the dinner table, right? So I find these small groups, connected groups, right? The neighborhood, getting to know a new family that just moved in from overseas and first time in the U.S. A sense of that, safety, just you showing that I'm here for you, I'm listening, um, and I would love to know, ways I can help. Also, for example, before I moved, when I moved to the US, I didn't really know a few things about therapy. For example, say if you're and in this country, we have a whole lot of places that we can go. National parks, walking in the woods, sitting by the river, sitting by the lake. It happened to me that I thought I could not do that for some reasons, just because of the trauma that I grew up with. Right, I was not trained, or I didn't have a sense of crossing from one area to the next. It was always involved in some sort of danger. But I think going on a group hike, for example, and just showing that, hey, the land is pretty open. Once you get to know what you like in your hike, what things you need to bring, and how peaceful you might feel. And I recommend this highly because I'm someone who does this almost every week. Sitting by the river, you're walking through the woods with all the trauma that you come with. It's an incredible feeling. So in other words, nature is critical for um, for most refugees. And America just shows us through its movies, often Las Vegas, New York City, but just like this concrete jungle where you run around with the police and it just all looks chaos. Whereas a huge part of this country is quite stable and calm and in some ways you could say peaceful. But I think every American has a responsibility to go with these people to show a sense of we got you. We're all in this together in case something happens. Because you never know in this country, people could attack you, but I have never had experienced that. But that sense of feeling of a community and the land and the wilderness and all the other connections that come with it is just amazing. So yeah, take a walk, take a hike, take a weekend, canoeing, kayaking, boat ride, whatnot. People will love it
Yeah.
always.
Yeah, no, and that's a good like opportunity. I was just hearing someone who is a runner talking about how great of an opportunity that, and actually they were talking about running, and some of them were refugees themselves, and just what a great activity, and people can share or people cannot. It's the same thing with like hiking out in nature, people can share or people cannot. Let's see, another question. Okay, so we should read your book, and then I think you have they were asking about recommendations for like hearing different refugee narratives, and then you mentioned podcasts, and then do you have other versions of your book, or are there other books or anything that you would recommend?
Yes, I think first of all, if you're interested, just go ahead and listen to the Abdi and the Golden Ticket. It might really inspire you.
And to tell you the truth, Abdi, I think I actually listened to that like years ago. I don't remember when it came out, but I think I listened to it on on NPR or what have you. I remember it.
I still get emails and Facebook messages from people who are listening to it 6 years later. So that is amazing. And I mean, if you I'm sure that for you to get a sense of the story that you want to know, that in-person connection is really critical. On top of my mind right now, if I had to recommend other stories or other people that you would pursue with, I mean, here's the thing, and I don't really want to be injustice here. I think everybody that I have met has an amazing story. I work with church world service, and we're working with clients, and like all the stories that we come across, just all inspiring and in some ways really change you a lot deeply, right? Um, and I did not know that, and I don't think I would have known that if I didn't get this platform to get to know people, to work with people. So if you're volunteering, you're in the right place, right? Um, if you are in one way or another involved, you might be one of those people that is not physically there, but you might be contributing to some organizations or sending out materials or whatnot. That itself is changing people, and eventually we might see a lot more wonderful stories come up in this country. And I volunteer with a local group that's now training young refugees to tell their story, and I think people like myself and others whose English is great and who somehow finished college in this country, we have that responsibility to show others the way. I came across a lot of new refugees who have these stories inside them, and they're trying to figure out how to get all that out. So and and I'm sure everybody here agrees how expensive or time consuming it is to try to get a book out in the United States. Finding a publisher, putting everything together, and all the editing that people. I mean, in my book, I went back and forth a lot with the editors. You know, they take things out, I argue, and I say, no, 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 I want that in there. You know, it's my mother's story. You know, or it's my own story. You cannot say it doesn't fit in here. So there's all that struggle, and with the publishing world, I've learned it's not so easy. So one of the things I'm working with is to produce that, you know, feeling of, if you really have to tell your story, it's going to be so expensive. And I really recommend, if there's like a little storytelling thing in your neighborhood where you invite someone to come up and maybe 5-10 minutes, you know, people talk about their story within a circle of small group that really wants to listen, wants to understand. Those are also some of the awesome things that people can do.
Yeah, no, thank you. And actually, Derek, if you want to close that out or skip to the next slide, you can. Not to cut you off though, Abdi. Go ahead.
Yeah. If there's no other question, I'm happy to keep talking.
Yeah, no. That wraps up most of our questions. And yeah, and I know that like each time that I've spoken with you, and like I said, I think even whenever I first heard your story years ago, yeah, no, I just appreciate hearing everything that you've done, and like you said, the things that like, oh, this is your home, and I'm glad that you're at home now. And is it Portland, Maine? Do you mind if I ask?
It's actually outside of Portland, Maine. It's Yarmouth, Maine. That's
all right. Wonderful, wonderful. But thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. And thank you for everyone else who's taken the time to be with us today on the Lunch and Learn. We would certainly like to hear from all of you and receive any feedback on today's Lunch and Learn, and hear your suggestions for future Lunch and Learn topics. We ask you take a moment right now to complete a survey. You can either follow the QR code on the screen, or you can follow the link in the chat. And we certainly look forward to hearing from you. Let's see, and you'll also receive a follow-up email after this with a link to the recording to today's webinar. And yeah, and I think I really liked what you said, Abdi, about, oh, if you do want to hear, more stories, like you were talking about some of these different opportunities, but probably the folks who have joined us today, not only did they get to hear yours, but they're doing the kind of one of the best things that they could do is they're probably out there welcoming folks and yeah, and hearing their stories as well. So thanks again, Abdi, and on behalf of Refugee Welcome to Collective, thank you to everyone for joining us, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.